Namaste. Welcome to the Advaita channel. I'm Bhagavati, and today I'm going to continue to read from Adyashanti, Resurrecting Jesus. But first I'd like to open as usual with a few words from Mujiji.
Beloved Father, who dwells within the soul of my being, whose name is I Am. Veneration to your holy name. Thy kingdom is here. Thy will prevails throughout the earth, as it does in the heavenly realms of my soul. You open your hands and satisfy the hunger of all living beings. You heal all hearts of sorrow, so that they in turn may show forgiveness to those whose minds are shrouded in ignorance of the self. Beloved Mother, who imparts to all the sense of choice, so we may finally come to choose you, who are truth, and thus find everlasting freedom. Glory to your name, O truth. For yours is the kingdom of existence, of peace and love. All power and glory emanates from you alone, who imparts to all the wisdom, light, love, and courage to refer to themselves as I am. Amen. Om.
Namaste Soham. Namaste Amber. Namaste Nimai. Let's begin. The last chapter I read yesterday was focused on awakening, the awakening of Jesus Christ, the process that he experienced. And Adyashanti sharing his own experiences alongside that. And today we continue with abiding tranquility. Abiding tranquility. The next stage of awakening is what I call abiding tranquility. Abiding tranquility arises when, through the purification process of the body and mind, initiated by the trials and tribulations, your humanity is literally emptied of conflict. What follows is an inner state of unification. All the forces in you are now unified your psychology, your spirit, your will. The personal will is no longer pushing and pulling you all over the place. And you no longer have a constant sense of psychological and spiritual friction. Instead, there is a deep state of abiding tranquility. And I know Soham, who's here with us tonight, will know this as perhaps as tranquil abiding in Buddhism. Abiding tranquility. Sounds like a beautiful place to stop, but I suggest that we don't stop this journey. There's no beginning, there's no end, there's no middle. Sometimes I read this and even wonder how Adyashanti can break it down like this, because I don't know, my own experience, I can't draw lines around it or edges or fences or anything. And yet ever grateful for this description, if only for others. If only for others, so that they can hear the words. A deep state of abiding tranquility. Now, this doesn't mean that you're always tranquil. You're still capable of utilizing the full spectrum of human emotion. Those of us who are in satsang, who are fully in satsang, know all too well how full this spectrum can be. We really do experience the full range of human emotion in satsang. But the inner underlying reality is a very obvious, abiding tranquility. And when there's real unification, nothing can pull you out of it. You might go through challenging times, but essentially, in the depth of your being, you're unified. And when you're unified inside, then you also see unification on the outside. Because the inner and the outer are actually one thing. So much I increasingly experience this oneness. Boy, I remember when it was just a concept, and I thought I understood it. But it was never something to understand. It was, oneness isn't something to learn or to study or to practice, to know about. It's only something that we can be, that we can live, that we can experience through being. And when that shift comes, wow. Yes, there's so much peace in that oneness. Suddenly to not feel isolated, to not identify just with one perspective of the world. Where can we say we're ever separate from another? Now, this phase of abiding tranquility is not really evident in the Jesus story until the end. In part because it doesn't make for good storytelling. Abiding tranquility is something that we associate with the Buddha seated in his meditation posture. As Mujiji would say, this is just an outer expression that we're describing. And this tranquil abiding that we're talking about here, this abiding tranquility, is so much more whole than this. It's a symbol for something that exists as a potential within all of us. The Buddha image shows us abiding tranquility amidst the turning wheel of life. The Jesus story is not focused on finding within yourself that still point around which the dualistic world turns, but on how that tranquility functions in the world of time and space. So we don't really get the image of this still point during the Jesus story. It's all happening so fast and furious. One event right after another. That this abiding tranquility phase isn't discernible except for the fact that Jesus' actions are expressions of it. But even though it isn't highlighted in the story, it is a key part of the journey of awakening. When this unification occurs, there's a simplicity to life, a deep sense of freedom and essential well-being, and also of fearlessness. Fearlessness doesn't mean the same thing as courage, because one is only courageous in the face of fear. Instead, it comes as a sense of immovability, a feeling that nothing is driving you or compelling you onwards. It can feel very much like the culmination of spiritual awakening, but it's not. When I used to visit my Zen master teacher, I'd go for Sanzen interviews, sometimes once a week, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes many times a day if we were on retreat. My koan was, who am I? And I threw all other koans out when I discovered this as my first koan, my great good fortune that it was my first koan. And I would go and I would make 3 prostrations to him and sit before him. And I would bring my answer. And every time, whatever his answer was, to me, his final words were always, full steam ahead, keep going, keep going. I had a feeling that no matter what answer I ever took to him, the answer would always be to keep going. Don't stop here. Don't plateau. Don't settle for this. Mujiji says to us, don't stop here. Keep going. Keep going. Whatever we experience along the way, don't settle. It's always deepening. There's no place for us to stop. There's no resting place. The resting place is who we are. We can just rest as awareness. We don't need to stop and rest in our journey. And the moment we settle for less. We settle for less than freedom. We are less than freedom. The moment we refuse to settle for less, we're free. So, abiding tranquility. See, I can't help but call it tranquil abiding. There's a conditioning. I know it so firmly as tranquil abiding. Can feel very much like the culmination of spiritual awakening, but it's not. A nice place to be, but keep going. This book is very much based around awakening as a journey. So as we move on now, we come to the transfiguration. And for those who need to know what transfiguration means, as I know a few people English isn't their first language, it's a complete change of form or appearance into a more beautiful or spiritual state. The transfiguration. For the next phase of the journey, I use the same name by which it's known in the Gospels. The transfiguration. In the Jesus story, the transfiguration occurs upon a high mountain where Jesus has gone with 3 of his disciples. The Gospel of Matthew reads, "There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light." It's from Matthew chapter 17, verse 2, New International Version of the Bible. For those listening to this Jesus story, whether from a Christian background or not, if you care to take on a Bible and to explore it as a result of these readings or just coming across the Christian story, the New International Version is a great version. It's one I have. Not a Christian, but what a book. What a book. And it's Guruji's edition is the NIV, the New International. It's very much recommended. So, there he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. In that moment, Jesus becomes radiant light. Becomes. Obviously, in the Jesus story, the transfiguration happens in a very striking manner. In most people's lives, it's not going to be quite that extraordinary. Are you disappointed? Wouldn't it be nice, huh? Face shone like the sun, clothes becoming as white as the light. Very beautiful description, the transfiguration. If we see it in a more human way, the transfiguration conveys a deepening of one's realization. Where there was abiding tranquility, What awakens now is a sense of an extraordinary vitality of life force. It's as if the fullness of your being is radiating. And from the tips of your toes to the top of your head, you feel this very deep and powerful radiance. And it does change you inside. When you've been in a state of abiding tranquility, and then you're infused with this impersonal vitality and radiance, very often it signals that there's something more in store. There will be another phase of your life, a phase not just of abiding tranquility, but also of radiant engagement. There's an interesting parallel between the transfiguration of Jesus and the Old Testament story of Moses and the burning bush. I know this is a story that Guruji very much enjoys to tell. In Exodus 3, like Jesus, Moses has gone up the mountain. There he's met by the burning bush, a bush filled with radiance from which God speaks to Moses. In the Old Testament, Moses encounters God in the burning bush. But Moses is still Moses, and God is still God. Moses comes down from the mountain with a new set of commandments, with a new agreement for his people, for his tribe, because the God of the Old Testament is a tribal God. Nothing is more important than God's relationship with the people of the tribe. The Old Testament God can be viewed as a universal tribal God. In the New Testament, there's a sense in which Jesus usurps Moses. Jesus not only has a relationship with the radiance, with the burning, but Jesus himself becomes it. Becomes the radiance, he becomes the burning. Again, in satsang, we know this burning all too well. This burning bush isn't a bush, it's ourselves. It's our satsang. This is a significant difference. It's not Jesus and the light, Jesus and the burning. He becomes it. It's not that one is better than the other. These are both mythic stories, remember. Stories mirroring back the potentials within every human being. Within your spiritual journey, you may have a phase of your life where you feel very much like God is other. And the goal at that point may be to have the most harmonious, unified relationship you can with God as other. For many people, that's a very important and beautiful part of their journey. But the Jesus story depicts a different order of experience. One in which you now fully experience yourself to be the divinity. When I say yourself, I don't mean your ego. If an ego concludes that it's God, that's a very deluded and potentially dangerous ego. How many people have got in trouble with this one? It's not your ego that realizes it's God. The radiance realizes that you are the radiance. So we're radiance realizing that we're radiant. When transfiguration occurs, we begin to move with what I call spiritual autonomy. By spiritual autonomy, I mean a kind of certainty, not an egoic certainty, but one that comes from your essential nature, from the level of divine being. We find this spiritual autonomy very clearly mirrored in the figure of Jesus. Jesus walks through his life knowing who he is and what he's doing, even though his disciples don't understand him. The authorities don't understand him, and the Pharisees don't understand him. At times it seems like the whole world is against him, but he knows what his mission is, and nothing and nobody is going to get in the way of that. He lives that mission out unto his death. The price he pays for that autonomy is his own life. This is a mythic portrayal of what spiritual autonomy looks like and how it moves in the world of time and space. It's not even trying to make the egoic perspective understand it a bit. It is its own dominion, its own sovereignty. It's going to do what it's going to do. And the egoic state of consciousness literally has no capacity whatever to understand it. Because this autonomy is functioning from a different dimension of being. Jesus spoke of being in the world, but not of the world. This is real spiritual autonomy in action. I believe Jesus displays and mirrors back this autonomy better than any other character in any other spiritual story or myth that I've ever read or encountered. relinquishment. The next stage of the awakening journey is what I call relinquishment. In the story of Jesus, relinquishment is symbolized by the crucifixion. Ultimately, relinquishment is the experience of the death of the ego. Awakening is the transcendence of ego. Awakening doesn't mean the ego is dead, or even that it's really gone anywhere. The awakening experience may change the nature of ego, making it more unified, more whole, but the ego is still there. Relinquishment is what spiritual teachers mean when they say, die before you die. Many people mistake dying before you die with spiritual awakening. Because awakening can feel like a death and a rebirth process. But this relinquishment is much, much deeper. In it, the egoic self actually dies. And afterwards, you operate from a different place. A place without a center. This is graphically portrayed in the crucifixion. In the Gospel of Mark, the last words you hear from Jesus are, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then his life ends with a death scream. This is Jesus' humanity, feeling completely and absolutely abandoned by God. This is a very dynamic portrayal of an actual inward experience. Of course, you can read the crucifixion on many different levels. And I mentioned earlier how some moments of difficulty, sorrow, and tragedy in life can correspond to the crucifixion. And if you've made it to satsang, you'll have had a few of these moments for sure. They're what brings us here. Our sufferings, our tragedies, our moments of torture. But here I'm speaking about the crucifixion as a stage of the spiritual journey. Ego feels like a death. Ego death feels like a death. It's experienced as a death. And usually the ego doesn't go easily. Of course, the ego's fundamental identity is that it is separate. Separate from life. separate from others, and religiously speaking, separate from God. This is what Jesus experiences in his last moments. The last vestige of the separate self, screaming out its confession. I have been forsaken. This is what the state of separation feels like being forsaken. Again, for those who are not English speakers, to be forsaken is to be abandoned, deserted. So here's Jesus feeling abandoned, deserted, forsaken, just as we do on our journey at some point or other, maybe many points. So this state of separation feels like being forsaken. We can only imagine how this last remaining sense of separation comes out of nowhere for Jesus. Here on the cross, as he lives out his humanity through the spiritual journey. From another perspective, he's already been through all this. Thus, in the very beginning, he descends from heaven to live the journey out, so that you and I have this story that mirrors it back to us. From another perspective, he's already been through all this. Something strikes me about this. I sat here speaking with Nimai just yesterday, I think. We were discussing how the awareness of death, the awareness of how fragile our human life is, and how, try as we might, we will not evade death of the body. And I just said, I was holding a cup. Okay, it's a glass. And in Zen, sorry to harp on about Zen, it seems to be my language somehow. We have a saying, this cup is already broken. You see, if we think this is perfect and whole and it must always remain perfect and whole and just as we see it now, we try and hold on and attach to keeping it just as it is now, then we're really stuck. Because how are we ever going to live? It's got to stay as it is. We're going to worry about scratching it, knocking it, dropping it, breaking it, someone else breaking it, at which point it's no longer a cup. It's no longer a glass. So this glass is already broken. And in knowing that it's already broken, because inevitably, one day, it's going to be broken, even if it outlives me, one day it's going to be broken. So it's already broken. And we're already dead. It's the same thing. Go through life worrying about going to die, I'm going to get sick, I'm going to suffer, this is all coming, it's all coming. Can get so stressed and so panic stricken. I'm already dead. Somewhere along the line, it's already happened. And it's perfectly fine. It's okay. It's actually okay. And Jesus living out this story that Adyashanti is sharing here is showing us this. He's been through this already. He descends from heaven to tell this story. How did he get to heaven? And who is Jesus anyway? The transmutation. The very last phase of spiritual awakening is what I call the transmutation. Transmutation is what transfiguration and relinquishment make possible. In it, your orientation to life is entirely senseless. No, it's not this at all. I'll start that again. Transmutation is what transfiguration and relinquishment make possible. In it, your orientation to life is entirely selfless. It's not that you want to be selfless, or you're practicing being selfless. Rather, you're selfless in the sense of no self. For this transition to happen, one has to go through the death of the ego. Certain aspects of the transmutation may occur earlier in our own journey, but the crucifixion or the relinquishment must be complete for it to happen in full. At that point, really, the only thing left to do is to be a selfless, benevolent presence in the world. There's really nothing else to do. Nothing else that makes sense. Whatever that may look like, and it looks different for different people. That's where the whole process ends up. In the Jesus story, this stage is termed the resurrection. Out of death is resurrected a new life, which really means a new orientation. That movement, that long turning from self-orientation to selfless orientation, now comes to fruition. This is where the journey culminates for Jesus. And this is where it ultimately culminates for anyone who's taken the journey of awakening. I'm going to read another couple of pages. The next 2 pages will take us to the end of this chapter, so it feels appropriate to finish at that point. Redeeming your human incarnation. The story of Jesus mirrors back the journey of spiritual awakening for anyone who has the eyes to see it or the experience to notice it. I believe this is amongst the most powerful lenses through which to view the story, because from this perspective, the story begins to live and breathe as metaphor. Jesus doesn't live and breathe as metaphor. Jesus doesn't live anything out in a small fashion. Everything in the Jesus story is writ large. This makes it easier for us to see what he's depicting is a journey of awakening. We shouldn't expect to live out our own journey in the same fashion. And fortunately, we don't have to. Through our journey, we will certainly have challenges and intensity. The mystery of the story of Jesus is the same as the mystery of you and me and everyone. We are all God appearing as man and as woman, divine being manifesting as a human being. They're actually 2 sides of the same coin. They're one and the same. It's only our minds that separate divinity and humanity. We separate them in our mind and in our experience. But the whole spiritual journey is finally to see that they aren't separate, that they never were separate. Even the theology of Jesus bears this out. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. John chapter 3, verse 16. As I tell people when I teach, God so loved the world that he sent it his only begotten sons and daughters. This not only applies to Jesus, that's you. Imagine if you took it on yourself to reorient your life, your trajectory of your life towards your divinity. Reading these words now, I feel like this is preaching to the converted here on the Advaita channel, those who are so regularly joining and listening to these readings. Reorient your life trajectory towards your divinity. Who do I know in this Sangha of being who isn't already doing this? How beautiful. Your divinity. I so loved the world that I gave it all of myself. Imagine your birth as an act of pouring yourself forth into life as a loving means of redemption. Imagine your human life as what you have come to redeem. And when you're fully awakened to all of it, then you fully redeemed your human incarnation. Every verse and episode of the Jesus story is a metaphor for the human experience of awakening. This passage may point to a realm of human experience that many people don't experience because they never stop. They never become still. But nonetheless, it's there. It is possible to find it in stillness, in silence. As the Bible says, be still and know that I am God. It doesn't feel so different from Papaji's words. Keep quiet. Keep quiet. And when you reorient your life towards this realization, then you understand. You so loved the world. You had so much compassion. You had so much love that you poured yourself forth into life. And that pouring forth was your birth. You are here to redeem whatever you encounter in this life. To wake up within everything the deep reality of its divine existence. The kingdom of heaven is spread upon the earth, and men do not see it. When you see this, you shift from being a victim of your life and assigning the blame for the tragedy you encounter. The truth, I would suggest, is that you have poured yourself willingly into form out of infinite love in order to redeem the entirety of this life. When seen from this perspective, all of a sudden, life looks very different. You stop holding back from life. Your inner life, or the life around you. Because the kingdom of heaven is within you and all around you. That's the message of the Jesus story. So I'll end here with, again, some words from Guruji. And tomorrow I'll pick up with part 2, the Jesus story. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening.
Beloved, all that you perceive is transient, is passing. But you are the unchanging one, timeless and perfect. Rid yourself of all delusions and come lay down here in the silence of being. For unlike time, you are not passing. You are the formless within all forms, the silence and stillness inside all movements of time and manifestation. Arise into the fullness of your real nature as the unchanging self, the goal and source of all being. Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya.
Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Shri Satguru Jesus Christ Ki Jai. Om Shri Satguru Mujiji Ki Jai. Om Shri Satguru Anantaji Ki Jai. Sangha of Being Ki Jai.